I met people who had never heard of homeschooling, and they started
Sure.
homeschooling. They hadn't heard about it on a
Mhm.
radio, nowhere. And they just said, God wanted us to do this. He did not want us to put them, especially in public schools.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked Podcast. I am so glad that you are with me this week. I have a guest on this week that is truly an honor to have him with us. I cannot believe actually that it's taken this long to have Dr. Brian Ray with us. We met years ago at it was an HSLDA conference, and I've always been so impressed with his work. I feel like I should have a stronger word than impressed, but that's the word that comes to me right now. He has done so many things for the homeschool community, and if you are not yet familiar with him, you are going to be so encouraged this week. I know that many of you have probably heard him speak at homeschool conventions in the past, and he's been in the homeschool world for a long, long time. And so I'm so grateful to have him on with us today. So we're going to talk a lot about just the history of homeschooling and some research on what's going on with homeschooling, what's happened in the past, what the future might look like for homeschooling. We're going to talk just a lot about his study of the homeschool world. But before we get into that, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, CTC Math. If you guys are looking for a great online math program, visit ctcmath.com. Try them out for free, ctcmath.com. Well, Dr. Brian Ray, welcome to the Schoolhouse Rocked Podcast. I am so glad to have you with us. Introduce yourself to our audience. And when I say this, typically, I'm like, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you and your family do. And I would really love for you to give a pretty good overview of NHERI, which is your organization, which we'll talk about, but also your credentials, your qualifications, because that really matters in our talk this week and the things that we're going to be discussing.
Yep. Thank you so much, Yvette, for having me here. It's great. Thank you for your work. I was just telling Yvette before we started talking how my wife said this morning, I'm so happy about all these young people who are doing the things we don't even know about in the homeschool movement. And years ago, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, we started hearing older people like I am saying, woe is us, woe is me, that we're all the young people, the pioneers like we are. Well, you know what? God has raised you up. Here you are. He always has whomever he needs to do the things, right? I mean, he's just done it.
Yeah.
And so I'm very thankful. I'm very thankful that there are younger folks who are so excited about God's principles and raising children. But what happened was, okay, so I was institutionalized, Yvette, right? So I was raised in a Roman Catholic environment, went to Roman Catholic schools, but from a very young age, God designs people a certain way, and I think a lot of us know early on what it might be. I've always loved animals. I've always just wanted to watch them and play with them and study them and all those things. So I went after high school, went on to get a bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Science in biology from the University of Puget Sound. From there, I went off and traveled all over the United States with my brother before many people watching this were even born, I'm sure. This is back during the bicentennial of America, United States of America, 1976, traveled all over the US for 100 days and 15,000 miles, came back,
Wow.
and I ended up teaching. Well, I got a carpentry job, and then I ended up teaching at an outdoor school, sixth grade public school students. I've always liked being around children and teaching children. Even in high school, I went down to a local grade school and tutored children in that elementary school. So that was just something I did there. And from there, then I went on and got a Master of Science degree in zoology at Ohio University. And there for my research, I studied pack rats, Neotoma floridana. So I was really into mammalogy and learned all the mammals of North America and all that kind of thing. Now I finished that and I thought, well, do I want to be in a lab all my life, or would I like to maybe get out a little more and be with people or something? So from there, now in all that, Betsy and I got married in graduate school. Graduate school is when I got saved, when the Lord got me and brought me into his kingdom. And right after that, Betsy and I got married, came back to Oregon, and she was finishing a degree in teaching. And I decided, hey, why not? So I got a teaching degree in Oregon. So I taught for a few years, middle school and high school. So now you can see kind of the science and then the education formally, right? So I did that. And after 3 years of that, I got kind of, I'm tired of that, teaching the same class over and over and over. And I need a challenge. I need a real challenge. So I decided to go and get work on a PhD in science education at Oregon State University. So while there, uh, I was teaching in biology, and I became a teaching assistant for the dean of education, and all kinds of things, all kinds of experiences. While there, Yvette, we were starting to have babies. And while we were there, I was very interested in alternatives. And Betsy and I have always kind of been interested in alternatives. Maybe you could say we are right wing Christian hippies. So we were interested in organic farming, and we were interested in drip irrigation on gardens. And while at Oregon State, I met some people who wanted somebody to teach their children part time. It turns out they were basically kind of left wing hippie homeschoolers, but nobody called it that yet. And from there, I started looking into homeschooling, and almost no research was done. So I pulled together a paper all about homeschooling and research on homeschooling and presented it as actually it was an exam for my doctoral studies. It was not my dissertation. And all of a sudden, after I wrote that paper, I was an expert on homeschooling. So one way to be an expert is do something almost nobody else is doing, and then you're an expert. That's basically what happened. During all of that, Betsy and I heard about homeschooling, and I started studying homeschooling. And one thing led to another. I did some research on homeschooling, and bingo, as soon as I got my PhD, the NBC Today Show called me and flew me from Oregon to New York City, picked me up in a limousine, and put me on the NBC Today Show with the president of the National Education Association, the big teachers union. That was amazing. I'd never done anything like that in my life. That was my introduction to the media and interviews with the media. Just 2 years after that, some other guys and I started the nonprofit National Home Education Research Institute, NHERI, NHERI.org. So that's kind of the preliminary before what happened, how we got there. God just led me from one thing to another. I went off to teach at Seattle Pacific, I'll just say a university in Seattle, and then started the Research Institute during that. And I went and taught at another college and kept the Research Institute going. And about 25 years ago, full time with the Research Institute.
We want to thank all of our sponsors for making this show possible: BJU Press Homeschool, CTC Math, Apologia, and IEW. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do this. Visit the show notes for links to these great companies and thank them for supporting the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. We are back with Dr. Brian Ray. That is an incredible story that you talked about before. And I don't know that you would call it a story, but just your qualifications and what you did before even getting into the world of homeschooling. You are well educated. And the reason I wanted you to share all of that stuff is because I didn't want people, we're going to talk a lot this week about your study of homeschooling. And I don't want people to think that you're just some guy off the street who maybe talked to 10 different people and now all of a sudden you're the expert on homeschooling.
Yeah.
Your bio, it says that you are a leading international expert in research on homeschooling. And I would argue that you are the leading international expert in research on homeschooling. I don't know anyone else who has done as much research as you in the past years. And we're not just talking about the past 10 years. We're talking about, you said, I think 33 years ago that you started researching homeschooling. Is that right?
I said that the Institute was started 33 years ago, but I actually started studying homeschooling more like 39 years ago. So before
Oh,
I left out a step, Yvette, you got it right though about the research. I left out that in 1985, I started the journal Homeschool Researcher. And keep in mind, it was 3 words, Homeschool Researcher. So that tells you
right.
something. That was before it evolved in America to a 1 word. And we used to have discussions
Right.
and debates about whether it should be 1 word or 2 words.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've seen that debate as well, even as recently as when we chose the name for the movie Schoolhouse Rocked: The
Oh, yeah.
Homeschool Revolution. I remember us talking about that. Like, do we put homeschool or homeschool?
Right.
And we finally we did. our own little bit of research and we thought, okay, most people are saying it as one word. And so we're going to just go with homeschooling
Yes.
instead of homeschooling. So yes, I mean, you have been in this world for such a long time and you have really put your whole, I would say most of your adult life's work into researching homeschooling and not just the history of it. I mean, you talk about the history of it, but really you have a really deep understanding. And so, talk for a little bit about your research that you've done. And I would love for you to take us, not through every step, but kind of what it was like from the beginning, 39 years ago when you
Hmm.
started researching it. And I know this is a big question. This could take a long time. We have about 10, 12 minutes here. So we can continue this on if we need to on Wednesday, but talk about your research on homeschooling and where you've seen it go.
Okay, way back in that time machine, around 1989-ish. I can't say the exact date, but I was already into it. I was already into it. In fact, I wanted to do a study on homeschooling for my doctoral dissertation, but it's a story we won't get into, and I can never prove it. But they did not want me studying and having a dissertation coming out of Oregon State University on homeschooling. So I did my work just on public school kids, but on my own, on the side, I was collecting data on private school children and homeschool children with the same questions as my doctoral dissertation. So as soon as they handed me the dissertation, boom, I went out and started publishing on homeschooling. And
Nice.
it was kind of an off thing that almost nobody would look into. It was called the theory of reasoned action, and it was comparing homeschool, public school, and private school students in terms of their interest in doing science, in their interest in doing studying science, and their interest in doing laboratory science, and then what would motivate them. And as it turns out, and this is going to start to sound like a broken record, the homeschooled children were more engaged and more interested in science than most of the others. I mean, that's what I found. That was way back in around, like I said, 1988. Now,
Wow.
around that same time, just after that, Mike Ferris, who was one of the founders of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, was making a speech somewhere or writing an article or something. He said, "You know what? We need in the homeschool movement? We need parents with their children to go down to their state legislatures and visit with legislators, and so that they can see their children, they're real, they're not weirdos, all that kind of stuff." And he said, number two, we need good, solid, sound, empirical research evidence. Well, HSLDA was the main sponsor of one of my first big studies, and it was a nationwide
Wow.
study of homeschooling. And we got into all kinds of things like parents' demographics, their income level, their ethnicity, education level, children, reasons for homeschooling, and standardized academic achievement tests. So even though those test scores are not the most important thing in the world, and I know you know that, Yvette, it is something that the public and the courts and the legislatures want to know about, right? Like, and a lot of
Mhm.
parents want to know too. Can my child, I'm not a government certified teacher. I don't even have a college degree. Can my children possibly learn from me, to do basic math and reading and writing? So it was a big study. It was a first of its kind, and it got a lot of publicity. We went into the news. We made booklets. We did all those kinds of things. And we found out that on average, homeschooled children do very well academically. We mailed out thousands and thousands of paper envelopes with stuffed with a family survey, and then probably 3 copies of each child's survey with self-addressed stamped envelopes. And then those got mailed in from all over the country to our little
Wow.
place in Seattle, Washington. We lived up there for 3 years. And then we had to open all those, and then we had to hand enter all of that into probably an Excel
Oh my goodness.
spreadsheet, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of
Oh
hand
my.
entries. That's how it happened.
I can't even imagine because you look at how easy it is. I mean, now you just can create a simple form on Google, shoot it out to, thousands of people and have answers within hours if you need them. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just amazing to see how technology has
yeah.
really helped in that way. I'm assuming this was back, and I don't remember when the date was, but this was probably around the same time that Dr. Dobson did his famous interview with Dr. Ray Moore, right? Where they started talking about homeschooling.
I would say that was more like probably closer to 1985-ish, around in there,
Okay.
maybe. So
Okay.
yeah, close. It was so people started hearing about homeschooling from different angles, just alternative
Yeah.
education discussions, ministries like Focus on the Family. Yeah, all of that
Hmm.
was bubbling and simmering and coming about at the same time. I met people who had never heard of homeschooling and they started
Sure.
homeschooling. They hadn't heard about it on a
Uh-huh.
radio, nowhere. And they just said, God wanted us to do this. He did not want us to put them, especially in public schools. I met people all over the
Yeah.
country who were doing that. Yes, it was around that time.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible. I know that there have been so many hands who God has used to bring homeschooling to where it is today, and we take it for granted. We forget about those homeschool pioneers like yourself who really did pave the way before us, so that we have our homeschool freedoms, and so that we have what we need to homeschool successfully, so that we can have those test scores, so that we can have all of the things that we can take to our legislators and say, hey,
Mhm.
look, this is what's going on with us. There oftentimes you will hear of kids who were homeschooled back in the 80s and 90s, and even I would say that the early 2000s, and they'll say, oh, my mom didn't do a good job of homeschooling, I didn't have a good education, I was deprived of my education. And so people will look at those kids and they will say, oh, well, look at those homeschoolers, none of them are educated.
Right.
Well, look at the public schoolers, many of them aren't
Mhm.
educated. Look at the private schoolers, many of them aren't educated either. Sometimes I think it really just depends on the parents and on the child. And so I love your research because you really do show and prove that home education really does work in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases academically, it really does work for students. And so I want to kind of hang on that right now. And I want to pull that into Wednesday. I want to kind of kick off Wednesday's episode with that and talk about why homeschooling does work according to the research that you've done. So we'll go from there. But tell us first where people can find out more about NARI. NARI is NHERI. It's the National Home Education Research Institute. Where can people find out more about you?
It's very simple, nheri.org. Just go there. There's a fact sheet that most people like to read right away. And of course, if you want to get free research, homeschool research news, not a bunch of junk email, because I don't have time to send out junk email, you can go to the top right, get connected, take you about 17 seconds to pump in your name and your email address. And then, of course, if you want to support us, you can always hit that button too, donate. I mean, we
Yeah.
live basically off of donations. We are not tax funded. We are not a big state
Yeah.
university. We are supported mainly by homeschool families and then sometimes research contracts. So that's really how we've worked and how we've operated. And people who believe in it and they know that, like you said, the facts and figures are very important. We always need them, even though there's a lot of research so far, we always need more because there are always new legislators who want to find reasons to try to control you.
Yep. Exciting stuff. We will put that link in the show notes. And we actually, if you've seen the movie Schoolhouse Rocked, you know that we actually talked about some of Dr. Ray's statistics in the movie and used that as part of our story. And so if you haven't seen the movie, you can watch it for free. Go to schoolhouserockedmovie.com, stream it for free, watch it with your friends, watch it with your neighbors and your family. And you will be encouraged, not just by Dr. Ray's research, but by the movie in general, because it will bring great encouragement to you. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Ray. Thank you guys for listening. We'll be back with you on Wednesday. And stay tuned to the very end of this program to get a sneak peek at what we're going to be talking about next on the podcast.
Education is discipleship, and this is something I didn't understand until I was probably 3 years into homeschooling. The Bible teaches us in Luke 6:40 that when a student is fully trained, he will be like his teacher. And as we look around the culture right now, I think it begs the question, who is teaching our children? Who is teaching our children, and what are they teaching our children? And to me, the primary benefit of having my children home with me is I am able to impart my worldview to my children.
Ask any public school teacher, private school teacher, government certified teacher, principal of a school, superintendent of a school district, whatever. Okay, just start asking a bunch of questions. When do children usually learn more? When they're in a group of 28 or when they're in a group of 3 or 4 or 5? When do children usually learn more? When they can master a subject or a skill before they move on, or when they have to move on just because it's a new day or a new semester? It doesn't matter whether they learn it or not. When do children usually learn more? When the curriculum or the pedagogical approach is customized for that child's learning style, strengths, weaknesses, dreams, and desires, or not customized? We all know the answer. Just start going down through this whole list of questions and say, well, which side of those answers does institutional schooling lie on more? And which one does parent-led home-based education lie on more? And systemically, by its very nature, parent-directed home-based education fits the bill more. So really, Yvette, the question is, why would homeschool children not do better?